Hi, my name is Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss how the polls have been moving in the right direction, how tactical voting seems to be taking hold, and how a Conservative minister was yesterday absolutely bricking it at the prospect. But first, if you'd like to see more of my videos, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, Robert Buckland, the Conservative Minister for Justice, was yesterday complaining about tactical voting against Conservative candidates. He was saying that this is something that needs looking at. This would be looked at, I presume, in the same way as the BBC will be looked at if it doesn't behave itself, how the Supreme Court will be looked at if it doesn't behave itself, how Parliament itself is going to be looked at. If Boris Johnson gets his majority, as I've discussed a few times, then there are going to be a lot of people, groups and systems looked at if they in any way work against the interests of Conservative Party leaders. In making his complaint, he referred to a mythical campaign leaflet that he saw that wasn't marked with the source. How do I know it's mythical? Because campaign literature by law has to contain information on who printed it and on whose behalf. And what's more, as a barrister, Robert Buckland QC knows that. He knows there's no need to look at the rules because there are already rules. There is already a law existing to stop it. If this leaflet actually existed, first of all, he'd have been able to produce it. But secondly, he'd have reported it to the police. It's a very serious matter. But it doesn't exist. In fact, it's the Conservatives themselves that are producing unattributable campaigning information, but on social media, where it is not illegal to have it unattributed, but is no less disgusting. It's becoming quite typical of the Tories now to accuse their political opponents of the sort of dirty tricks that they themselves are pulling. And I have to say, I feel very sorry for people who have been Conservative supporters up until this point. What this extraordinary whinging shows, however, is that tactical voting is posing a serious threat to the Conservatives' plans for a majority. It's like the scene at the end of Star Wars, isn't it? We've analysed their attack pattern and there is a threat. So now they're trying to make tactical voting sound sinister. In fact, that's the very word he used to demonise those who are trying to promote it. But it isn't sinister. It's a necessary device when your way of life is threatened and you decide to put country before party. Polls have been showing that the Conservatives are in trouble. They're not beaten. They are still technically in pole position. But they are in trouble. And this is the thing that people are failing to understand about the polls. Well, aren't they predicting a large majority for Boris Johnson? Yes, they are. So how can it be close? How can it be tight? How can they be in trouble? Simply because of first past the post. The polls predict a large majority. That doesn't mean that if there's a sudden swing, he'll lose a few of seats in that majority. He's currently polling to win a large number of seats, but only by tight margins. All it takes is for a really small number of people to suddenly decide to vote tactically on the day in certain constituencies that perhaps are not planning on voting right now. Johnson's majority in that situation goes completely up in smoke. You have this weird situation which is baffling for many people who don't really consider statistics deeply, that he could win by 60 seats, massive margin. He could lose by 40 seats. And it doesn't take much to move from one situation to the other. As the party political campaign has dragged on, the party fortunes have waxed and waned. Labour have gained slightly recently, not enough to push for a majority, but they've gained a little. But the campaign for tactical voting has improved steadily through the campaign. And it is a difficult concept to explain to a Labour supporter that perhaps in their constituency, voting Labour makes a Labour government less likely, not more. But that doesn't make sense. But it's our political system that doesn't make sense. Yes, it's an absolute madness. If you want a Labour government, you should vote Labour and that should help the cause. If you want a Liberal Democrat government, you should vote Liberal Democrat and that should help that cause. But it doesn't. It doesn't at all. Labour aren't going to get that majority. They can only form a government at all, realistically, by getting more seats than the Conservatives. In this scenario, other parties may just support Jeremy Corbyn's bid as Prime Minister on certain conditions, even though they won't join him in coalition. But it would at least kick Johnson out of Downing Street. Now, let's say you're in a constituency where Labour have no chance, but the Liberal Democrats could beat the Conservative candidate if they don't split their vote with Labour. Well, in that scenario, voting Labour increases the number of Conservative MPs going to Parliament by 1. And that's how Labour supporters need to think. You can't always increase the number of Labour MPs. You should be able to. If we had proportional representation, you would be able to. But we don't. You may live in a place, through no fault of your own, or maybe it is, who knows. But you may live in a place where you cannot help get a Labour candidate into Parliament. But you may be able to reduce the number of Tory MPs. And that works to the same goal. You know, on a simpler level, many Remain voters who are not necessarily as party political are also increasingly seized of the notion that Brexit only gets stopped by stopping Boris Johnson. That's it. That's all you have to do. Stop Boris Johnson and you can stop Brexit. And even if it's not as easy as that, or you don't believe it's as easy as that, you know that you're never going to stop Brexit if Boris Johnson gets his majority. We have actually lost if that happens. The game is up. And there are still a lot of undecided voters out there. I mean, in such a tight campaign, the way they finally swing could make all the difference. And what of the surge in registrations amongst young people? Will they turn up to vote in similarly large numbers as well? Or did they just register because that took no effort on their part? They could do it on their phone while they were bored. I wouldn't read too much into that, though. The thing is, when you've got a load of new registrations and they're the sort of people who don't normally vote election and they may do this time, it does produce a larger error in the polls. Absolutely. Whenever voting behaviour changes from the norm, it of course increases the error in the polls, and there's always an error on polling results. But that error is still quantifiable. People treat the situation as, oh, there's this error, so anything is possible. No, some things are beyond that even larger error. But what is well within is dozens of constituencies going against the polls because a few hundred people suddenly decided on the day, and that's all it needs to be, a few hundred people in a few constituencies on the day to give Johnson a kick in the balls, and the day is won. You know, and all because a Labour supporter who's voted Labour all their life decided to vote tactically just this once, because a moderate Conservative voter, disgusted with the way their party has lurched to the right, voted tactically. Because a first-time voter voted tactically. Because the country decided that they'd had enough of spivs ruining their lives and voted for whoever would champion them against Boris Johnson and his cabal. And this is why we need to keep up the discussions. Share things on your groups on social media. The Conservatives are going into overdrive with their campaign of misinformation as we near the end. They also know that lots of people make up their minds on polling day itself, so expect the ace up their sleeves today or tomorrow. Counter it, and don't think that the work is done at the end of today just because the polls open tomorrow. Yes, by the time you're talking to people tomorrow, they may well have already cast their votes. The polls open at 7 a.m. But keep talking to them on polling day itself, because, I mean, some of them cast their vote ages ago if they're doing postal voting anyway. But actually, many of them vote later in the day. They don't vote early. They vote after work or college. Some even leave it quite late. The polls don't close till 10 p.m. That's when it's safe to take a break. Until then, keep reminding people what this election is all about. It's not about party politics. This is not a normal general election. You know, party politics is what Dominic Cummings wants you to think that it's all about. It's not about manifestos. That's what Boris Johnson wants you to think. The general election is being fought on a single issue. Do we want a no-deal Brexit, or do we want to stop that? You may have another motivation for how you would like to use your vote, but when you're casting your vote, that is the question that you're actually answering. So I hope you find the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, and if you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details as well. And until next time, I'll see you later.